Hey everybody. Welcome to wasmCloud Wednesday for Wednesday, June 18th, the Wasm cloudiest day of the week. Let me share. We've got a pretty fun agenda for you today, starting out with something that we don't always do, but be really, really fun. And it's as we discussed in the pre-call, only partially my fault. So let's get started. So if we look at the agenda for this week, I have a pretty cool, probably, demo to talk about transaction support in the wasmCloud Postgres interface. The wasmCloud Postgres interface right now supports querying and batch queries and preparing statements. We had a nice feature request to add transaction support to this, and I wanted to show what this looked like. I have a PR up for this now just to get some additional feedback. And then I threw on a discussion item here. I think Taylor should be here a little bit later, but I just wanted to talk generally about our wasmCloud repository, see if people had opinions, thoughts, and things about the Monorepo setup. It's just something we've been doing for a little while now, and I want to be able to talk about it. So yeah, okay. So the really, really cool thing that we're going to do right in the beginning that I'll time box at like 2 minutes because it feels stupid, is you all are going to help me write a little SQL query. And no, this isn't really relevant to the demo itself, but yes, I do need it to be working before it works. Okay, so yes, I set up my password as Postgres, but nobody should worry about that. If my question is, shouldn't this work? I just need to insert into this table the this value at the description column. Shouldn't this work? Should I just be able to say hi? Or am I doing too much? Insert into. This is what I was Googling right before. Insert into blah, description values, right? Give me an example.
Yeah, that
Oh,
looks correct.
What's your table?
Postgres. Ah, quotes. Come on. Okay, whatever. Here, you get three things. Great. Okay. Postgres is stupid. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Okay. So I have a really dumb table. Here you go, Bailey. I have a really dumb table. It's just an ID, a description, and created at. This is the same table that we use for this is the same table we use for the example Postgres component that we have in the wasmCloud repo. And I'm gonna go ahead and do this. I inserted a couple rows into this table. So you can see, row one, two, and three all have a description updated via transaction, whatever. So let's say, so I wanted to go through this demo. I wanted to update all three of these rows, the description of every single row to be the same thing. And I only want it to work. I only want it to take effect if all of them succeed. So I am no SQL expert, as you can tell by me fumbling with these quotes. But if you wanted to do this, transaction is a great way to do it. So I can change, I can curl this component and I can say, hey, I want my text to be Wasm Cloud demo, right? Now, as soon as we do that, you can see here on the left, here, let me scroll it out a little bit. All three of my rows have been updated via transaction, one, two, and three, Wasm Cloud demo. What this is actually doing is I have a TinyGo component and it's grabbing my two little like X headers. That way I can send in different information into each request for fun. And then I have an invalid SQL one, which I'll show you in a second. And it updates all of those rows, the description of all of those rows to be updated via transaction, row one, two, and three, right? And then the new piece here is actually the transaction resource inside of the component. And this works pretty similarly to what I've seen a lot of Postgres libraries do. You create like a transaction object, or you like on your client, you initiate a transaction. So I have this transaction T. And then the only difference from the regular wasmCloud Postgres library is instead of calling query regularly, you call the query method on this transaction, it has the exact same signature. So if you wanted to convert some of your existing code to transactions, then you would just need to modify it to call on this T object instead. And then at the end, it's very similar to working with WASI HTTP directly. We can call transaction commit with that transaction, and then if there's an error, then we can return that or what have you. So the properties of this transaction, when you commit it, you are saying, I'm not adding any more queries to this. Like you take ownership of the transaction, we are committing it. And if it doesn't work, if there's any problems, then we'll roll back. And that's really cool because here, if I wanted to say, do something. You can see all of my failed attempts. It's in here somewhere. I should just look for it. Invalid. If I wanted to do something like edit the, oh man, this is getting really unwieldy. Sorry about this. Okay, if I wanted to change the row text to foobar, but I have this invalid SQL header, this actually tries to prepare a statement that's just not valid SQL, right? This can't execute. When I do that, you get a nice actionable error coming back to the component that you couldn't commit the transaction, there was invalid SQL, and rolling back. And you can see that nothing was affected in the SQL table at all, even though we actually sent off all of the queries in the first place before we added that invalid one. So yeah, that's how transactions work in Postgres. And this is how it looks when you put them into the wasmCloud Postgres library. This is something I think that should be really, really useful for folks who are basically just trying to execute a bunch of different SQL instructions at the same time. This has a really nice benefit of essentially when you call this query, nothing needs to resolve instantly. You send it to the provider inserts it into the transaction, and then basically gives you an ACK. So the process of doing this is very, very quick. So by the time the provider actually executes and commits the transaction, it has all of your queries right there. Of course, just like a normal transaction, I guess the downside is that you can't get the specific like return values of any of these queries, but that's how transactions work. So yeah, this is it was pretty cool how how not too bad it was to add this here. Now I would like to just sync up with maybe Roman and Victor on the wasmCloud side to make sure that I'm not introducing any issues when I add this transaction interface, since this will be a new version of the SQL a new version of the SQL interface. Maybe I can just add it as I could maybe do like 0, 1, 2 and it wouldn't be an issue, something like that. But unsure. But the actual oh, nice. Thanks, Bailey. The actual interface is not very complicated, and a great example of using a resource in a provider to have a unique object that you're continuing to call methods on. So is Masood in here? Masood's always in here. Hey, Masood. This was one of the first times that I was actually able to come back and work with a resource on the WRPC provider side. So I would love to talk through how that code works and then maybe throw it into our documentation because that's something we have on the roadmap, or at least we should. But this worked uh, really well. I think there's maybe a couple gotchas, like working with the resource on the WRPC side is like at first when you look at it, you're like, wait, was this supposed to be? But once you actually take a look at it, it's not too bad. So yeah, query batch, commit, static functions, all fun stuff. Okay. Um, I think that that's all. The demo, of course, is really, really simple. But do folks have any questions, comments, any concerns with how this transaction interface looks? I'd love to kind of rev this. The Wasm Cloud Postgres interface is just a draft anyways, but rev this and get people trying this if this is something you're interested in. Alrighty. Well, hey, that's the demo. Thank you all for dealing with my initial frustrations about not understanding how SQL works. But using the right kind of quote is a universal problem in programming, so I don't feel too bad about it. Beyond that, so we will with the wasmCloud Postgres interface, I think what we'll do is we'll one validate that we're not making any breaking changes by updating the version to 020 or properly gate that and wit however we need. But the good news is wasmCloud Postgres is actually not built into the Wasm Cloud host at all. It's a completely separate lifecycle. It's just like a custom interface in Wasm Cloud. So we won't need to do like a host upgrade or anything for this to roll out, which is pretty cool. Very, very cool. I think beyond that, the only other discussion item that we had on the agenda officially today was to talk about the structure of the Wasm Cloud project. So let me share my screen here. When I say structure of the project, I don't mean anything huge or administrative. I only mean the organization of our repository being, hey, the repository, wasmCloud is pretty much the home of all of our development. It is, for all intents and purposes, a monorepo. Um, However, there have been a couple of repositories that we've moved out of this, or projects like specific areas that we've moved out of this project monorepo, namely the Go and the TypeScript repositories. And some of the reasons behind that, we can talk about, but I would paint a really broad brush and say that when you're working in a specific language, repository, there are usually just broad sets of conventions that that language expects. Like Go expects to be at, and again, I'm speaking at a super high level. Not that you can't configure around this, but Go is expecting to be the main thing in the repository. And if you're using a Go workspace, then you configure that separately too. And wasmCloud, the project is, a Rust repository, which assumes that you have a certain structure, that you have a cargo.toml and cargo.lock, and all the CI cascades from there. So especially for Rust and TypeScript, where we are essentially trying to provide custom or so provide like nicer experiences um, around the component SDKs and the examples, having them in their own repo can make it easier. It also makes it easier for us to set up maintainer teams for it. So anyways, when we think about the wasmCloud repo, there's a lot in here. There are some things like documentation. This is the project home for all intents and purposes in GitHub, so it's going to host things like our license, our release process, our roadmap, security, contributing documents. People who are coming to view the project for the first time should see that. This is also I think light mode. Sorry. This is also the homepage that people will see, if they come from the CNCF landscape and they find our super cool project, they're going to go to wasmCloud. So it makes a lot of sense as that. But from this provider, or from this repo, we produce wasmCloud, Wash, all 9 or 10 of our capability providers, all of the crates that power the providers, wasmCloud, Wash. Um, we host all of our examples with the exception of Go and TypeScript, which we've mostly moved over to their respective language repositories. Um, and in general, as a way to manage the vast amount of things that we have in this repository, we use a cargo workspace to deal with the Rust bits. And we use Nix to deal with any of the complex CI building, releases, image creation, um, building for different language tool chains, building for a variety of targets. Um, sorry that this has just turned into like a project layout explainer, but just trying to set the stage for what I think some of us maintainers have been talking about internally for a while, which is it's a lot, and it would be nice if it was simpler. And making CI simpler is no small feat. But the way I see it, we really have two options with this repository. You know, we either lean further into the monorepo setup, and we use monorepo tools to ensure that we're not wastefully building things, wastefully running CI to test everything when just like one particular dependency changes. So that we can release and build examples and test those separately. Um, and that would either involve more Nix expertise as a monorepo tool. We've done some investigation into that. I think Roman by far and away is our expert there. Maybe like adopting a buck two, um, something that requires expertise in the tool, right? And then I think the other option is to simplify by making separating out different repositories where we can. Now, I don't have a proposed structure, and the hardest part about this is that it takes time that we may be putting towards wasmCloud examples or documentation or development, just to kind of shuffle everything around. However, I think if you've yeah, initial expertise, that's a good way to put it, Yordis. Initial expertise and then also maintainer expertise. Like somebody needs to be on the hook for that. Um, but I have seen a lot of people struggle to contribute to wasmCloud because of the structure and um, layout of this repository. And I don't want to fall into I'm sorry, I can turn this off. I don't want to fall into the engineering trap of thinking like if we just changed it, then everything would be better. Because there's definitely a reason why we moved to this in the first place. Like if you needed to change something in Wasm Cloud Core, something that would, affect potentially all capability providers and Wasm Cloud and Wash, then you could do that all in one PR. Like that is the biggest benefit that I can see to the setup that we currently have. So yeah, I feel like I've been talking for quite a while. I have a couple proposals, but not to seed the conversation ahead of time. I'm curious if you folks have any thoughts, any opinions. These are things that we are should be thinking about as we look forward to the next quarter roadmap. Um, Jordis's head's about to fly off from nodding. What's up? What's up, Jordis?
Yeah. Yeah, primarily because I normally maintain like one mega gigantic monorepo for the work. Like literally there are like as many languages as you wish. So what I found is that if you're gonna find yourself uh, adding and removing a lot of things to the layout of the project, where it becomes a nightmare to maintain and you have to keep up with it, then that's where I will move away from it. But if it is an initial cost of figure out what layout is going to be beneficial for your infrastructure or like repo, whatever, then I found that it's not that problematic. It is a pain that you pay ahead of time, one time. Most of the time after that are really, really minor. And lastly, with the I forgot the name, but the Git now has a way to like chunk sparse checkout. Like the way we somewhat figured out how to do it is that okay, let's assume that we have different roles in as a programmer, right? Most likely gonna wear one or two hats at the time, not that many. How would you set up the sparse checkout for that developer to never care about anything else, right? It could be based on clients, could be based on providers, could be based on like, I mean, the CLI, could be based on the core. So we somewhat like, okay, let's analyze how the sparse checkout from Git will work to figure out the hierarchical structure, and then from there now move to CI to figure that out. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's worth it, in my opinion, to actually keep going with this setup. CI always gonna be frustrating, but it's not changing all the time. That's my thought.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jordis. I think that makes a lot of sense. Like reevaluating where we are, um, and then figuring out the right way to move forward there. And Bailey, you had a comment in the chat about our layers keep changing.
Yeah, I think the part where our layers keep changing is the way to produce gas keeps changing. And I think we think that's going to change for the next 6 months as well. So that layer keeps changing. So I guess what I would propose is that you lean into a monorepo with wasmCloud being Rust and lean into the language Rust for maintaining that as a monorepo. Basically doing the cargo workspace style development, and then everything that's not that, pull that out. That would make that a lot easier. And if you're gonna do a monorepo, you have to invest in it, right? And I think it's hard with the community maintained repo. You and I just commented on this. I was updating Helm charts and then I failed wash unit test. I'm like, what are you doing in there, wash unit test? I just changed charts. Come on, man. Get out. And it's possible if you have the right patterns established and everything, but this project it's large. It's very large. And so it's a big technical debt mountain that we got to figure out how to burn it down.
Yeah, and we had some I put some effort into this. I can't remember if it was the beginning of this year or late last year or so, but I put some effort into trying to make some of our GitHub actions properly gated by like, hey, only run the wash tests if these specific rates change or whatever. Um and that sort of worked. Oh yeah, here we go. I can show. So, you know, we are only supposed to run the wash action at all if GitHub workflow wash changed, if like the install action change, if any dependencies change, unfortunately, you have to run it because it could affect wash. That's, with our workspace. These crates change, but nothing in here affects the PR that I think you had, Bailey, which is in charts. So, I don't know why that's happening. So that's bad. But
Yeah,
the
that's what I'm saying. If you figured out what happened to her and you maintain that list, if that is all the time changing and adding, that's a cost I would say like it's not worth it. But that is gonna stabilize real quick. You're gonna run out of these, and especially if you do the trick of the sparse checkout, even more. Uh, Granted, at the root of the project, you can no longer most likely what will be the word like favorite a given tool. Like you have to give up to this, like, oh, let me open the entire repository from the root in my IDE. Because now it's like, okay, is your IDE for Rust or is your IDE for Go? Is your IDE for TypeScript? Stuff like that. Like we have to give up to that as well. Like we don't like you have to open it from something lower to avoid all the problems of like everybody wants something at the root, which sometimes it's not worth it to be honest, somewhat annoying, but that also was something that to keep in mind.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, hmm. Mm, Part of it. Yeah, sorry for just noises. There are some things in GitHub Actions tools that are less desirable aspects of GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions is dope, but one thing you can't do is when you have an action that you want to pass, you need it to pass 100% of the time to merge, which I want to say like wash and wasm cloud tests if anything modified wash or wasmCloud, tests need to pass before you merge. But if nothing modified wash or wasmCloud, don't worry about it. There is no way to express that in GitHub Actions. And it's the if it doesn't run, which is the hard part, which is why we have this whole setup in our CI right now, which is like inside of the action, it always runs, but you do like a metadata check ahead of time to see if you need to run the full action, quote unquote. So it looks like we need to audit that a little bit. But we kind of need it for like Wash, wasmCloud, all of our providers, things like that. Um, so I like Bailey's idea at least that the main wasmCloud repo, if we can kind of constrain it to be our Rust things, then that makes it a little bit less complex. We can work just kind of with cargo. We can work kind of with just the cargo workspace set of tools. There are other cargo workspace tools like hakari, whatever, that help that help the workspace thing. Um, but the am I still sharing? No. I think that yeah, that would be a further investment into the tools. One thing that I certainly want at all times is to be able to basically press a button and have wash release without um, wash release, wasmCloud release, and focusing a repository around like a binary release makes a lot of sense in my brain. Like if you're gonna contribute to wasmCloud, you go to the wasmCloud repository and you contribute to your thing, and then it gets released in the like the next version of the binary. Yordis, would you with your I don't use sparse checkout in any of my like development workflows, right? I mean, I also don't use submodules. Like there's so much in Git, right? So my initial thought is if like people are coming to the repository to contribute, like the only thing we can really ask them to do is like git clone, and then they like, they have it, right? Um, in your experience, is there like a can just throwing this in a development.md or contributing.md work,
Yeah, I get your question. So like most programmers like me don't care about the sparse checkout because like I really don't bother with this whole shebang, right? I would say you can always direct people to say, hey, remember that this is a feature and here's somewhat based on the roles and how people may maintain the project, how you want to give it a command that already says sparse checkout into, I don't know, core development or whatever, something like that. So I think it's like definitely you need to educate your people, right? The maintainers or whoever's gonna maintain. Other people don't care, like clone the whole thing. I'm not even bothered by it. Also, you mentioned something about releases. That's also a pain in the ass in GitHub, and keep in mind, because in GitHub, you're going to have different channels for releases. So when you tag something, you have to say, hey, this release is the latest, right? Or pre-alpha, or whatever. Okay, pre-alpha or latest of what? Because there are multiple binaries inside, and you may have different release schedule. So we have to give up to that meaningful, this is latest tag slash release in Git. Like really doesn't really matter the latest feature in GitHub and stuff like that. And all we care is like this tag point to that. Um, it's just a Git tag and that's it, right? It's just a pointer to a specific point in time. The people consuming the packages and so on like have to understand that, hey, make sure you understand that. And lastly, related to the release, auto code gen release and things like that from GitHub itself. When you say like click and auto code, that becomes a mess as well. Like it's no longer about like given package or whatever, so you have to give up to that. And now, for us to fix that part, we use release please, which basically you define your components and stuff like that, and then creates a change log and things for you, and even create pull requests for you to merge, and that eventually ended up in a release. So we don't use the GitHub per se, but keep also that in mind.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. From what I understand, different like I haven't used GitLab extensively really, but there's like Circle CI, like other CI tools have some things for that too. Um yeah. That's definitely a thing with some of the auto generator releases that we have. Since we use conventional commits and like auto labeling and everything, that's really nice, but we can't have different templates for release notes for wasmCloud and Wash if they live in the same repository, for example. They're the same, like, you know, so it's the same like template, which is fine, but we may want to segment that out. Um, yeah. So I tend to agree that keeping the Rust structure of, I have a binary and then a set of libraries that powers it that may need to be separate, and like keeping those all in the same repo so that you can, work with them together. I haven't used the release please action, but I will pull it up. It's from Google. Yeah, no, I'll look at it. Um, where that general structure is really nice. Um, I think that in the name of using people's expertise in the community too, one thing that is complex about our setup is that we use Nix for a lot of the building, composing, image publishing of our repo, for pretty solid reason. Like we were building a lot of different language tool chains, and in theory, you can use it locally too for your development. I don't personally, maybe I should. Um, but one of the things somebody asked in the community Slack the other day is like, how do I build the wasmCloud Docker file? Like, where's the Docker file at? And that's not directly related to our monorepo, more so just our choice of tools. So, I'm curious um what folks think there. But in general, I think that our current repository setup and set of tools is definitely a barrier to entry to the ecosystem, especially something, as special as WebAssembly. So I'm really interested in folks' thoughts to make this simpler. Tools like Yordis is sending for release, please. Like, I think it'd be great to evaluate some additional tools. And at the end of the day, I don't want to fight the GitHub model too hard. We're not we can't really get away from it. Actions are going to power the CI for us. So, I want to try to fit within that model as much as possible. Yeah, Yordis.
Yeah, so Brooke, my question for you is like, what what from the monorepo requires the exact same release cycle? Because that's where the whole shebang of like moving repositories around for you as a active maintainer all the time, you're gonna pay the cost of that, like synchronizing of releasing here, then release over there, then come back here and release over here. And in the worst case, it's no a break change technically, but the release cycle will force you to now deal with I cannot release anymore because there is a cyclic dependency. And that will be, one of the worst thing that could ever happen. So before you move anything around, I don't know the answer, but like, what is the release cycle of things and the dependency between them? Either have to always point to one direction, and as soon as you have any cyclic dependency, you're better off actually leave it there for now until you prove that it's definitely worth it to move on.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
Um, I've done a lot of thinking about this because lately I've been somewhat inundated with all the different PRs. So when I'm working on wasmCloud in my spare time, I end up with like going through all the dependent bot PRs and then like the merge queue. Like the problem right now is we have just there's flaky tests, there's a whole bunch of things going on, and I feel like we're kind of at an inflection point. I feel like it would take the same amount of work to go either way. We either need to fully commit to our monorepo and I think do the work to make it work as well as a monorepo, or we need to break it apart. And I honestly think, like, based on everything I could look at right now, it would be the equivalent amount of work either way. So it's more of a choice of what we'd prefer to do. Um, I will say that regardless of which way we go, um, I'm not a huge fan of keeping Nix around as our primary build engine. For what like context here, I have given Nix a pretty fair shake. I actually use it entirely for my package management locally. Home manager, I actually love Yordis. I stick with home manager. It's real nice. Um, and I love like the Nix. I use Durenv with like a Nix shell, like a Nix develop on everything. Like I find that much better than using a container for a development environment. I also don't mind keeping around the flake to like build stuff with, but for me, we also have this mixture of like, okay, where's the Docker file? So nobody knows how to build the image. And so I'd rather have the Docker file. And honestly, it's going to be faster probably to do it with the buildx. The time to run Nix derivations and pull the cache and do all that adds much more time. Even which we all can admit, the wash tests are probably our most terrible set of tests. Um, and those are still shorter than with all of their crazy fetching things a bajillion times over network and all that, than the stuff is with Nix, which is all hermetically sealed. Um, and so I'm not a huge fan of keeping Nix around as our primary build engine. I think it's hard for anyone else except for a select few to be able to help out with our CI problems and how to work out with them and to do all those things. So I would say that no matter which way we go, we need to switch back to normal pipelines. That can be pretty easy as an off-ramp to do because we create the new pipelines, run them in parallel, and once we're confident in those other pipelines, we can cut the next pipeline. And like I said, I want to keep the flake around. I want to keep the development environment around. I think that's good to have and have the flake be able to build so that people can pull it in who are using Nix. I think that's all fine and dandy. So that's my opinion with the Nix. And then I think we need to have the conversation as a community of do we stick with the monorepo or not? I actually think I want to stick with the monorepo, but we need to invest into tooling if that's the case. Buck, Bazel, something. I don't really, those are kind of the two big ones, but like, I don't care which one, but I think that'll also solve a lot of that problem with like some of the releasing because we get the whole dependency graph from those build tools. So anyway, sorry, that's a little bit of a long soapbox there, but that's kind of where I'm feeling with stuff. Um, and I'm curious what people think about all that.
100%. I tell you that few people will go understand Nix. The rest, the 90%, 99% of the people don't get it. I give up to that as well, Taylor. Because they don't get it, and now they have to learn something that's complex by itself instead of just focusing on like, hey, install this thing here and there. And we use Bazel as well for the monorepo stuff. So I strongly agree with you.
Yeah, Taylor, I I tend to agree with like for GitHub workflows. Shameless self-post. For
More like lazy not wanting to have to write it twice.
Taylor put a little link to his blog, which I did read, and it was good. This whole wasmCloud Wednesday is sponsored by Taylor Thomas. No, the I definitely tend to agree with the get the workflows being GitHub Actions. Thanks, Sudansu. See you later. Because we're on GitHub, that is where like people who are actions experts could come in and help us out. There's there's a lot of tools there. It's not free. We would have to, we'd have to write those too, but generally I think people are a lot more comfortable with GitHub Actions than Nix is a like workspace engine, and maybe it would help us lean more into the cargo workspace. I have reservations about adopting a Buck or Bazel, not because I think you're wrong that we would need it, only that I don't know how to use it. And so it'd be a lot of well, like you just mentioned, this is like the initial knowledge that like we would have to learn it and then be able to be experts in it.
Also, the Bazel, for you to take advantage of tools like Bazel, right? You have to do the trick that I'm telling you about, the sparse checkout, and figure out the layout. Because if you don't figure that out, like Bazel's not gonna help you, and then you're gonna be like all over the place. So the structure over like how you're gonna release it and how you're gonna maintain it and the dependency in between thing, like you normalize that first, by the way. So that's why I'm like, step one is figuring that out first.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but I think, yeah, what Bailey said, same problem, different tool. Like,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
the only advantage of the Bazel and Buck, which is why I hesitated, because I played with some experiments with it, which is why I hesitated to suggest it before,
Mhm.
is that the advantage over Nix is that Bazel and Buck are meant for mono repos. Nix really is not. You have to do a whole bunch of like filterings and all sorts of things, but like the cargo Hakari was something I found out via Nix actually, because they recommend it. And so like the cargo Hakari part, I feel like could be a really good solution. We could try that, have the workspace hack crate, and then just build with cargo. Because yeah, like cargo, like Bailey was mentioning, like cargo workspace actually works pretty well. And so that could be all that we need. And I'm okay with that because I think if we can do that and with some of the stuff we've done with making the builds, the provider builds, I think we made them optional via the features or whatever. Like then but whatever, like just making that could also speed things up and make it a little bit easier. Like I'm fine if we want to do that to try that first before we'd go to any other tool. But like we kind of like went to a mono repo and never fully invested into the any tooling for it. So I want to finish it up or I want to take it out. And right now I'm leaning towards finishing it up so that we can have a better experience for everybody. Make it easier, especially I think there's people who'd be willing to help out, like add some things to CI pipelines and whatnot if it was easier to do that. Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Bailey. I think if we keep them along language lines, it makes our life easier. If we ever have to combine, like fast forward 5 years from now and wasmCloud's taken over the world and we're all super happy about it, then I think then we can maybe talk about combining things. But I think if we do the yeah, if so I'm all on board with that. Like, and I was going to start maybe trying to toy around with replacing some of the pipelines just right now, even without the workspace hack, and then like start looking into the workspace hack, but also anyone else who wants to do that, like Yordis, you've expressed a lot of interest in it, and we can collaborate and get that done. So I just wanted to make sure like community's okay with that. All of you are the ones contributing, participating. I just want to make sure that like that seems to follow with what people want, which we can jump this in Slack as well after, just so people who weren't here can dump their thoughts too. I think maybe just link to this discussion and be like, just go pay attention to the discussion and let us know what you think.
Yeah. Yeah. I would reiterate maybe that we're making no decision in this call, like just trying to throw out some options and get what people think. Hmm. Yeah, the heuristic I'm operating off of, or the assumption, is that if it builds faster and it's easier to contribute to, then do that.
Yeah, I think honestly, Brooks, I think the action here is like let's link to let time-stamped version of this recording on YouTube um after in Slack and say like, hey, we talked about this. This is the general feeling of consensus where we want to like head towards. What are people's thoughts? Give it a week, and then we can make a final decision next week. That way it's like out and committed in public.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds good. That'll coincide pretty well with the quarter 3 roadmap too, so we can decide like, are we exploring I, with how complex the I think we certainly need two things. With how complex the with how complex the current repository structure is now, we probably need like to explore replacing some of the Nix related actions with just GitHub Actions, and we also should probably like draw a crate graph, as horrible as that may be, but just to understand like our dependencies of dependencies, because I think there's some work. Ooh, okay. I think there's some tool may already do it for us. Some work that we could do in simplifying some of the crates that we have and maybe just module gating instead of making them totally separate. That may make things easier to throw out a straw man. It'd be really nice if like all providers just needed the provider SDK and then they don't need to depend on like anything else. And things like that. But right now there's like the test util and tracing. I prefer to have like a 3 deep tree or whatever than whatever we've got. So maybe some work there that we would have no matter what in the cargo workspace.
Oh, actually, there's an example in that Guppy thing I just found that uses it says print out dot representation of a subgraph for formatting with graph viz. So anyway, I'm not sure if that would actually work, but I'm pretty sure we could programmatically create something that would show it just to keep it all straight for people.
Hmm,
So
cool.
I think Hakari uses Guppy under the hood. So
Okay. Yeah, I gotta understand Hakari a little more on like where it slots in.
yeah, but I think you're right. Like we'd have to figure this out. Like we'd have GitHub Actions, Cargo Zig builds, amazing. That would do our cross builds for us really easily.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
actually have to head now. So if there's any more discussion, please feel free to continue. But I'll look forward to next week and then in Slack if there's anything we need to follow up on there in any discussions.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Taylor, for coming by.
See you, everyone.
If folks have any other, we've been chatting and monopolizing time. Do folks have any other thoughts, opinions? You know, Masood, I saw that you said you support it. He did actually say that. I'm not just making that up. Um, yeah, Aditya, Mike, Eric, Florian, um, you know, all opinions are welcome if you got them.
I think you touched on the important points. Things that kind of complicate repo management. Testing is being one of them, definitely, right? Uh, and 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 I don't find the repository structure in particular complicated or very complex. It's more the CI that the project has is complicated. And right now I more or less know a lot of things about it because I have gone through it multiple times. But definitely for newer users and newer contributors, it poses a significant challenge to understand what is what and how things are built and where they can find something. And you gave that example very well about the container or the image of the wasmCloud, right? It's not readily discoverable for people to understand where it's being built and what are the dependencies and so.
So then we need to make that a goal, this refactor, right? I think we should probably sketch like what the outcome we're aiming to achieve before we start slicing and dicing. And one of those would be I click on a wasmCloud host. I want to know from where it was released or if it was off of a SHA and go back to, the build that produced it. That's the kind of information that I need. There's lots of ways to do that, including a lot of the stuff that we've explored in the signing world. But I'm also just talking about the basic CI side of things and making it easy to track that artifact going through.
Yeah, maybe just to restate some of my high level and maybe specific goals as for bringing up this discussion so we can think about it going forward. Um, I feel like we've identified that the current CI, the process of contributing to wasmCloud is complex and is likely to have turned away maintainers before, at least provide a frictionful experience contributing, even for our season contributors. Specifically, I would love to have a more predictable release pipeline. Right now we use a tool, Cargo Smart Release, which doesn't actually have workspace support, and we kind of hack around that with like our own custom branch. I'd like to have a push button release for each of the binaries that we choose to host in the main wasmCloud repo, specifically so that we can say, hey, new version of wasmCloud is ready to go. Let's release it. And in that process, it should be pushed to package managers, should be pushed to GitHub, should have auto-generated releases, should have a container that's built and tied back. And then, but the vast majority of my biggest goal is so that when you contribute to a specific area of the wasmCloud repo, the CI runs for that area, and only that. That's probably the biggest problem that we have now, is a bunch of different actions that run on every PR. Yeah, Yordis.
Yeah, so one thing that it may be required regardless of what we do and still hope is that the existing contribution guide is an explanation, not a how to. So maybe we should have like multiple how to contribute based on those roles that you're mentioning. That most likely will be the ones that you will move with the new repos anyway. So if you centralize it, I don't know if this has the point. Just a naming change, but like the existing contribution guide is explanation. It doesn't help me to contribute to it in a sense of like task oriented.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, folks. So that puts us, with my SQL floundering at the beginning of the call, puts us right at about 2. Thanks everybody for coming and discussing the super fun things of running a project like Monorepos. Yeah. Hope everybody has a great rest of your day. If we have any more discussion here, then we can feel free to pick it up in Slack and just keep chatting about it. But yeah, have a great day, everybody. We'll see you next week.